There are approximately 15,000 Canadians with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism that is characterized by significant difficulties in social interaction, along with restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior and interests. Jay Serdula knows this firsthand. Even though he was diagnosed as a young adult with Asperger's, Jay has accomplished many goals. He has a BA in Applied Mathematics with Electrical Engineering electives at the University of Waterloo, a master's degree in Physical Oceanography, and is currently employed as a research assistant in the Chemical Engineering Department at the Royal Military College of Canada. And Jay is here to help us all understand more about Asperger's and life as an Aspie. Jay, welcome to Full Circle.
Thank you.
We are so happy that you have come to be with us, and we just want to ask you some questions and get to know you a little bit better. I wanted to ask you, as a child, did you feel any different with Asperger's as a child?
Yes, I did feel different from the other students at school, but without an actual diagnosis, I was unable to understand or explain the differences. I felt I had no choice but to live with the differences as best I could and adapt to the social environment as best I could despite the differences.
Now, Jay, at the age of 26, you were diagnosed with Asperger's. How did that knowledge affect you then?
At first, it didn't affect me at all because by then I had learned to live with the differences. I was afraid to tell people that I had Asperger's syndrome because I was afraid people would think of me as disabled or handicapped. Even in the best case scenario that the other person had a sincere desire to help, that person probably wouldn't know what Asperger's syndrome was, and I would have had to explain it to them. So I thought my most promising solution was to bluff. Now, knowledge that I have Asperger's syndrome helps reassure me that I'm not necessarily unusual. At first, it takes more time to explain my differences to other people, but it usually pays off in the long run. And I've found that most people are more accepting of me and patient with me once they understand why I'm different.
Well, what's the biggest challenge you face day to day?
The biggest challenge I face day to day is probably multitasking. I do well at something if and only if I really give it my focus. The flip side is I have trouble focusing on more than one thing at a time. In other words, I can't multitask very well. I suppose this is true for everyone, but more so for people with Asperger's syndrome. One example is when someone asks me a question, especially a question which I'm not prepared for, and at a time when I'm not prepared for it, and when I'm focused on something else, more often than not, I have to drop my focus, figure out what the other person already knows, what sort of background they have, what they want to hear. I have to translate the other person's terms into my terms and before I can answer the question. Meanwhile, I'm trying to make this translation with as little focus as possible so that I can maintain my focus on what I was doing before the question was asked. It would help if people would give me more advance notice.
And Jay, if you could tell the world one thing about Asperger's, what would you say? What would it be?
People with Asperger's syndrome are not usually as threatening as they seem to be at first. Because people with Asperger's syndrome are not necessarily any better or worse than the average person. They're just different. And it's often difficult to realize that they're different because from the outside, people with Asperger's syndrome seem completely normal. So my advice would be, don't be too quick to judge and don't assume that they're going to pick up or understand what you're trying to tell them as quickly as the average person would. Like be patient with them and be ready to spend more time to get to know them.
And Jay, you have gone above and beyond to help us all understand Asperger's a bit. You created this T-shirt, and I really appreciate this T-shirt. It says on the front, "If you ask me, how are you, it will take me 30 minutes to tell you. So do you still want to know?" And then on the back, more information, points to remember. "If you only intend to greet me, say hello, not how are you. Do not ask how are you unless you really want to know the answer, and you can spare at least 30 minutes to listen to the answer. And if I appear to be in a hurry, do not ask me any questions." That is so appreciated because really it's it's more for us to understand your thought process and how you move from point A to point B to point C. And so I appreciate the fact that you did that T-shirt. Now, Jay, I want to move on now to your life of faith in God, because you say that really you connected with God on a personal level when you went to a youth group in Deep River. What made you go to that youth group?
Well, my parents went to the Catholic Church, although not always on a regular basis, so that gave me some exposure to God and the Bible. Now, when I was in grade 8, one of my classmates invited me into the Free Methodist Church youth group, and I enjoyed the activities so much that I wanted to continue going to youth group. And after repeatedly attending the youth group for 2 years and receiving regular exposure to Jesus and Christianity, I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior.
Now we're just eager to know, how did having Jesus in your life change your life?
Well, I've come to realize that my time and my money and my life do not belong exclusively to me, but to God. So I've tried to be more patient with people, regardless of whether they're Christian or not, and regardless of whether they understand my differences, and tried not to be too quick to judge. Like 2 Corinthians 5:16 says, "For no longer do we regard anyone from a worldly point of view."
And how has your faith helped you interact with people? What difference does that make?
Well, through my upper years of high school and all throughout university, most of my social time was spent with other Christians, and usually, if not always, these people were very accepting of me and patient with me, despite the fact that I wasn't able to explain my differences. So that gave me lots of role models to learn from.
And then Jay, how do you think the church can help people with Asperger's, like yourself?
Well, Jesus never labeled anyone, but could always see right to the heart. So I believe that as Christians, we should all follow that example, not be too quick to judge anyone, but remember that every person we meet was made in God's image and is here for a reason. So regardless of how different someone is, we shouldn't judge them, but take the time necessary to get to know them.
Excellent, excellent lesson, Jay. Now, I want to move on to your life in sports. Now, when did sports become important in your life, and why did you choose swimming?
Well, I was in grade 6 when I started to lift weights. In grade 8, I joined the school cross-country running team. Now, in grades 9 and 10, I wasn't very faithful at attending the cross-country running practices and quit the team prematurely. And in grade 11, my school was shown a video of Terry Fox and his ambition to run across Canada. So that made me feel remorse for having quit the cross-country running team early the previous 2 years. And I thought, I may never run across Canada, but the least I can do is be more faithful in attending the practices and make sure I attend all the meets. That was the turning point, after which running was my favorite sport for several years. The reason I eventually chose swimming, or actually part of the reason why I eventually chose swimming, was that it's less strenuous on the joints than running and therefore less prone to injury.
Jay, you have accomplished so many things, including swimming across Lake Ontario. Who inspired you to attempt this?
Well, in 2006, Jenna Lambert, who's 15 years old at the time and has cerebral palsy, swam across Lake Ontario. Because you're not allowed to touch a boat or use any flotation, including a wetsuit, the hardest part of her swim was the feeding times when she had to eat with one hand and tread water with the other hand. And I was so inspired by her successful crossing that a few days later I thought to myself, I want to swim across Lake Ontario.
And she's from Kingston, as you are.
Well, the greater Kingston area,
Yeah.
I think.
And would you swim across Lake Ontario again?
I can't see that happening. Like, not only did the swim itself take its toll on me, but so did the 2 years of solid training. So part of the reason I swam across Lake Ontario was to demonstrate the determination and perseverance that a lot of people with Asperger syndrome have, and thus demonstrate that what people with Asperger syndrome can do when they put their minds to it, and demonstrate they're not necessarily handicapped, but they do have exceptional talents. So if I were to make that demonstration all over again, that would have limited additional benefit, I believe that it's time to move on and help the Asperger's community in other ways, such as by giving public speeches about Asperger's syndrome.
And from that experience, Jay, you've written a great book called The Ambition of an Aspie. Why did you write this book?
Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, I enjoy writing as a means of communication. I often communicate better in writing than over the phone or in person because there's no pressure to respond to other people's questions quickly. I have more time to think about how to choose my words, and I don't have to worry about my facial expression or my intonation giving a message that contradicts what I say with my words. The main reason why I wrote the book was to bring the world to a better knowledge of Asperger's syndrome. Like, Asperger's syndrome didn't have a name even in Europe until 1981. And to this day, a lot of people still haven't heard of Asperger's syndrome. Even those who have tend to have a lot of misunderstandings about Asperger's syndrome. So it was my hope that by writing the book, I would clear up some of the misunderstandings of Asperger's syndrome, because I believe the world could benefit from more awareness of Asperger's syndrome. And the final reason why I wrote the book was for my own benefit, because swimming across Lake Ontario is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement whose memories I'm sure I'll want to cherish for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And we are so glad that you've taken some time out, Jay, to come and spend time on the Full Circle couch with us. I think we've all learned a lot just by spending these few minutes with you. Thank you so much for being with us, Jay.
Well, my pleasure.
And your book, again, it's called The Ambitions of an Aspie, and it's your journey across Lake Ontario. Congratulations on writing the book, and thank you for being with us, Jay.
Oh, you're welcome.